Storm of Steel by Ernst Jünger is a memoir of a German soldier's experiences in World War I. Originally published in 1920, the book underwent no less than 8 revisions until it reached its final version in 1961. Throughout its existence, the book has been no stranger to both praise and criticism alike. Storm of Steel was immensely popular from its publication in the Weimar era, around the time Jünger stated that, quote, he hated democracy like the plague, and throughout the years of the Third Reich. After the war, Storm of Steel, much like other books, was banned from publication in Germany by the occupying Allied military governments. Fortunately, this injustice was not to last, and as early as 1955, it was winning literary prizes, much to the chagrin of the Frankfurt School. As the decades progressed, so too did the book's notoriety. In 1982, Jünger was awarded the esteemed Goethe Prize, which is made all the more impressive considering his opposition. As the book's translator, Michael Hoffman, wrote, his mere continued existence was enough to goad to fury a wide band of literary and political enemies in Germany. Whether he wanted to or not, he remained a rallying point and object of fascination for the fascist right, and of horror and embarrassment for the left. It is worth noting that Hoffman is not exaggerating when he states that the left truly despised Jünger. Referring to Jünger, Jean-Paul Sartre once remarked, I hate him. Furthermore, Hoffman also writes further down that same page, as an instance of the unbridled hatred felt for Jünger in certain quarters, in the 1990s, in Berlin, only in Berlin, a gay musical version of Storm of Steel played to appreciative houses, a multiple and systematic persiflage of an experience and values that to him were sacred. One does not know whether to laugh or cry. Unfortunately, such ugly and scornful displays of degeneracy are all too characteristic of the despicable ilk who belong to the left. They feel an unceasing craving to defile everything that is good, beautiful, and noble, and the war memoir of a great German soldier is no exception. With this in mind, we now turn our attention to the man Jünger himself, and ask, what is the story of his life? Ernst Jünger was born in 1895 in Heidelberg, in what was at the time part of the German Empire. A natural warrior if there ever was one, Jünger ran away from home in 1913 to join the French Foreign Legion. Seeking adventure and martial honor, he was sent to Africa to train as part of the Legion. The subsequent year, however, marked the outbreak of World War I, and out of a sense of patriotic duty, Jünger left the Legion to serve his home country, Germany. Over the course of the war, Jünger was wounded 14 times, and every time he refused offers for a safer role, instead choosing to fight in the front lines with the 111th Infantry Division. This earned him the respect of men higher up in the echelons of the German army, and as a result, Jünger rose through the ranks to lieutenant and earned 2 of Germany's most prestigious medals, the Iron Cross First Class, of which Jünger was the youngest person at the time to have earned it, and the Pour le Mérite, also known as the Blue Max. Towards the end of the war, Jünger was selected to become a Stormtrooper, one of Germany's elite soldiers, and served in the hardest missions until the war's end. Over 20 years later, Jünger volunteered to serve in the Wehrmacht, and despite being told that he was too old for combat, served anyway. While Jünger also became known for his writings and his philosophical outlook later in life, in Storm of Steel, he has little to say with respect to politics or philosophy. The book is very much a recollection of war experiences taken from his diary, written during the war, and as such, scant lines can be found as to why he and his country went to war. Instead, the book focuses on the day-to-day, more often than not hellish realities of trench warfare. Admittedly, the nearly 300-page book simply contains far too many war stories to recount all of them in the scope of a YouTube video. But to summarize a few, Jünger writes about being fresh off the train in Bazencourt, his experience in the infernos at Les Éparges, his wounds at the Battle of the Somme, his job of leading stormtroopers at Passchendaele, and his role in the spring 1918 offensive, among many other battles. Throughout the book, readers get vivid descriptions of battle wounds and dead bodies, the dangers of missions across no man's land, the ferocity of unrelenting artillery barrages, which is called drumming, the terror of soldiers when they witness a gas attack permeating the trenches, and the sadness one feels seeing his comrades fall next to him, to name a few of the hellish realities which the soldiers faced. Given the horrors of World War I, perhaps it is most surprising for readers to learn that the thing Jünger describes as being the worst experience throughout the war was boredom. Despite suffering a panoply of wounds, seeing men die, getting sleepless nights, and starving on rations, it is none of these things which Jünger identifies as being the worst part of being in the trenches. Instead, Jünger reiterates several times throughout the book that it is boredom. Perhaps this curious remark cannot be understood by readers today, and only a man who actually went through the horrors of trench warfare, such as Jünger, will ever truly know. Another striking aspect of Storm of Steel is just how many passages stick with the reader well after he or she puts the book down. Just as was the case with there being too many memorable stories to include them all, so too are there too many profound quotes to analyze them all. As such, I have chosen 4 in particular, which best fit with the themes of dutiful service and martial valor. Beginning with the first quote, on page 58, Ernst Jünger describes how a soldier should view his enemy. As he writes, "Throughout the war, it was always my endeavor to view my opponent without animus, and to form an opinion of him as a man on the basis of the courage he showed. I would always try and seek him out in combat and kill him, and I expected nothing else from him, but never did I entertain mean thoughts of him. When prisoners fell into my hands, later on, I felt responsible for their safety and would always do everything in my power for them." Here, Jünger demonstrates a warrior's mentality, complete with a sense of martial honor. He will kill his opponent across the battlefield without hesitation, but does not seek to be sadistic and sully himself. The theme of martial honor is also present in the next quote, which can be found on page 277. This was written towards the end of the war, as the men knew Germany was going to lose. Quote, "Standing under an apple tree, I addressed a few words to the men, who were drawn up in front of me in a horseshoe arrangement. They looked serious and manly. There wasn't much to say. In the course of the last few days, and with a kind of sweepingness that is only to be explained by the fact that an army is not only men under arms, but also men fused with a sense of a common purpose, probably every one of them had come to understand that we were on our uppers. With every attack, the enemy came forward with more powerful means. His blows were swifter and more devastating. Everyone knew we could no longer win, but we would stand firm." Despite knowing that the war was lost, Jünger and his men demonstrate unwavering duty through their determination to serve their country until the armistice is signed. Also relevant to point out is that as a lieutenant, it was Jünger who addressed the men as their leader. This segues us into the next quote, which centers on the theme of what defines good leadership. To this point, Jünger specifically cites his colonel, a man named von Oppen. As Jünger writes, "On the 24th of January, Colonel von Oppen left to take command of a battalion in Palestine. He had led the regiment, whose history is inextricably bound up with his name, from the autumn of 1914 without interruption. Colonel von Oppen was living proof that there is such a thing as a born leader. He was always surrounded by a nimbus of confidence and authority. The regiment is the largest unit whose members know each other. It's the largest military family, and the stamp of a man like von Oppen shows clearly in thousands of common soldiers." Such praise coming from a soldier of Jünger's caliber ought to be taken seriously. As the paragraph goes on, Jünger states that he was quite sad to hear of von Oppen's death and that he owed him a great deal. This appropriately brings us to the final quote I picked out, which explores the subject of death. In 1918, Ernst Jünger had a scrape with death on the battlefield, which he writes about on page 281. To quote, "At the same time as feeling I had been hit, I felt the bullet taking away my life. I had felt death's hand once before, on the road to Mori, but this time his grip was firmer and more determined. As I came down heavily on the bottom of the trench, I was convinced that it was all over. Strangely, that moment is one of the very few moments in my life which I am able to say they were utterly happy. I understood, as in a flash of lightning, the true inner purpose and form of my life. I felt surprise and disbelief that it was to end there and then, but this surprise had something untroubled and almost merry about it. Then, I heard the firing grow less, as if I were a stone sinking under the surface of some turbulent water. Where I was going, there was neither war nor enmity. Obviously, the reader knows that Jünger survived, but as we can see, in the moment, he certainly did not think that. Only by swift intervention from his men did he get to return to a field hospital. This quote is particularly profound as it showcases a warrior's perspective on death. Jünger did not cry, he did not plead to a god, he simply stared at death's hand and welcomed it without an ounce of fear, for he knew that he did his duty. Together, these 4 quotes about the treatment of one's enemy, fulfilling one's duty until the end, the characteristics of a leader, and the warrior's embrace of death encapsulate Ernst Jünger's martial philosophy. It is from these 4 passages that I argue the reader can glean the most benefits. In our current, profoundly unheroic age, Jünger can teach men of the right to take on their challenges head-on and embody the thumos of a warrior as he did on the battlefields of World War I. In conclusion, Storm of Steel is a book with many serious lessons packed within its tales of blood and gore. Leftists will not touch it unless they intend to attack the memory of its author. To these individuals, the book contains heroic insights which they themselves will never understand, let alone appreciate. To us, however, as men and women of the right, Jünger lays out a path for exhibiting valor amidst the most nightmarish of circumstances. For him, Jünger did this in the trenches of World War I, while for readers today, we find ourselves living in an age of sinfulness and decay. It is most important for us to remember the 4 passages laid out here, and to face our challenges head-on without cowardice, just as Jünger did for his country and Kaiser 100 years ago.